Back now live to Orlando East, where the Mandela Centenary celebrations continue at the Methodist Church out in Orlando.
We say to you, leave us alone. Let us rather serve the Egyptians. Is it me alone who hear of similar comments? Is it me alone? Comments like Madiba sold us out. Is it only me who hears that? He should not have agreed that we begin a process of change. We rather would have waited amongst the poisonous snakes. We rather would have waited and served the people who were oppressing us. Why did he do it so early? Was it early? Was it early? Moses said, stand firm. Stand firm. And God said to Moses, tell the people to move on. People not to be paralyzed by the memories of yesterday. Let them move on. The future is still waiting. The future is still waiting. And the reason they did not go back to slavery, even when gripped by fear of the noise of the pursuing horses, is because they were leaders who held the banner of hope and said, stand firm. And in those days, as Musala would say, we knew what leadership was all about. There was no doubt. Nobody canvassed to be a leader. But the leaders lived the values of where we are going to. And people said, this is a leader. Leaders who get elected by popular votes will take us nowhere. But leaders who live the hope of the future, who carry with them values that undergird that hope, will make a change. Will make a change. Second thing, there was a price paid. And that price is our inspiration today. The leadership to take people through the wilderness towards freedom require a clear vision for a better future. And listen to this. And a lot of sacrifice. A lot of sacrifice. What continues to inspire the people, what continues to inspire ourselves around the world is the extent of sacrifice and unwavering focus on the dream. People who are able to say, I'm not doing it for myself, for this dream, if need be, I am prepared to die. Deep sacrifice. Deep sacrifice. The dream and the hope convicted Madiba and others who sacrificed with him and those before him to endure the pain, not only to themselves personally, but at great cost to their families. The turmoil in their own lives, the pain, the loss and suffering will never be fully told. It is that story which was undergirded with values of freedom that continues to inspire us today. We have to turn around what Michelle Wrong called, it's our turn to eat. We've got to turn it around with values-based action that says it's our turn to sacrifice for a better tomorrow. It's not our turn to eat, but it's our turn to sacrifice for a better tomorrow. It is important to remember that, my dear friends. It is important to remember the pain and suffering endured by these leaders and those who led the way before us. And that memory must anchor our steps towards the dream envisioned by Mandela generation. When we focus on the dream, there must be nothing that makes us to devour each other on the way. We are like the Hebrew slaves on the journey, in what Bongani Finger calls a time between times. We are at a place between places. We may have left slavery, but we have not entered the promised land. The time between times is a time of doubts. It's a time of false promises. But it is a time also of blinding calls. People who want us to believe that we are there. And they lack the understanding that we are not there yet. Stand firm and move on. The story is told and retold in order to inspire us to restore what Professor Njabulo Ndebele calls, to realize the solemn responsibility to make the legacy of Madiba a living experience. Did you hear that? Allow me to rephrase, because I'm a preacher, I'm not a professor. So as a preacher, let me borrow those words with respect and paraphrase them. Let us make the mystery of God's will, as communicated through the lived experience of Madiba, our guide as we attempt to move towards the vision of a Christ-healed Africa for the healing of nations. On the walls of the Jazz Museum in Kansas City, where those jazz musicians took time, and they have their memories hung all around the walls, I found these words. We are not the makers of music, but they're good jazz musicians. Their music is good, but they write the makers of music, but vehicles through which God sends his vibrations of life to the world. We are not the makers, but we are only vehicles through which God sends the vibrations of life to the world. As we celebrate Madiba, the call is upon us. It's upon you to make the sacrifice and allow God to use you as vehicles of his vibrations of life to the world. Inspired by the sacrifices made by the Madiba generation, and convicted by the hope of a world waiting to be born, let us be vehicles through which the vibrations of values-based action are sent to the world. It is in our hands to make our world a better place. Finally, reconciled towards the vision, let us commit to join together in making it a reality Because that world exists. It's waiting for us to be obedient and to lend ourselves to be the vehicles. You know, in the other reading, when the 3 disciples were with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, they were overwhelmed. Listen to this. They were overwhelmed by the foretaste of possibilities that they did not want to go down. Peter broke in. Master, this is a great moment. It is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And that great preacher, Thomas Long, writes, Peter wanted to halt the story there. That's right. Peter wanted to halt the story there. Because it was so beautiful. Let's stop it here. But Jesus led them down the valley. Down the valley, they meet the real cries of the people. They meet the crowd, and from the crowd emerges someone who comes and kneels before Jesus and shares his pain about his child. Down the valley, people feel real pain, and they look for answers. I cringe when I read the next sentence. I brought my suffering son to your disciples, but they could not cure him. The people had hope in people who follow Jesus. They have hope in the church. We brought our pain into the church, and the church could not make a difference. The church began to look at each other and enjoy the songs and the sermons. And people come and bring their pain, and they go back home with no change. Because the church is busy with itself. They even fight amongst themselves because they fail to hear the groans of the people. Down the valley, people look for answers. Because it was a child that the man was concerned about. Let me talk about the pain of parents at the suffering of children. Mandela addressed the annual children's celebration, which is on the calendar of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. And he said this: the event is a reminder to us all that the needs and well-being of children must be on top of all agendas. Can I be confident and be bold to say to the world, in the Methodist Church, the needs and well-being of children is on top of the agenda of every society. Please tell me to go out into the world and tell the stories of your top agenda, the children. Madiba continues. It is simply the sincere desire to make society more familiar with the smiles of children rather than their tears. Quote unquote. Let us not forget that down the valley, children are crying as they go to bed without food. They groan as they can't access quality comprehensive education. They grow as they long to break from the scourge of abuse and killing. Secondly, we're told that on the day of his release from Victor Festa prison, he is recorded to have said, as I walked out of the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew that if I don't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison, quote unquote. Down the valley, we need to recognize the destructive trail of lack of forgiveness in our homes and in society, resulting in partners killing partners, even comrades killing comrades, because they carry with them the bitterness and hatred that makes us to be in prison, even in these days of our freedom. We are called to recognize the human face in each other, the image created by God when God said it is good. We must abandon the life-destroying tendencies, the life-destroying words, and the life-destroying actions, and commit to values-driven life-giving words and actions. Yes, there is a world waiting to be born. Let us remove the spectacles of hatred and bitterness that delay us and move on to what can be. The wait has been long. Listen to this. Now I end. God has created all that we need. The only thing that makes suffering last longer is because we refuse to share the God-given resources so that all may have life. Down the valley, people still live in spaces that rob them of their dignity. And we continue to argue. Yeah. Can land be shared? And people are bold enough to stand and say, no! And even other people ask, whose land are you going to take and to whom are you going to give? Really? Really? People live in spaces that rob them of their dignity. And so, the debate on land let me stop it. The debate on land. Let me leave it there. People don't have decent spaces to live in, nor do they have access to pieces of land to ensure livelihoods. Mandela would have said, on this one we have to be on the same side, those who have the land and those who don't. Let us be on the same side and recognize that it cannot continue to be the way it is. Something has to change. Because reconciliation includes moving together towards a better life for all. Then peace and righteousness will flow like a never-ending stream. So as we move from this celebration, let us go down the valleys of life. But this time, let us go with Jesus, the Christ. Let us go in faith, because the disciples at the foot of the mountain tried to sort it out on their own without Jesus. Let us go in faith in God of life, who is able to transform situation. Let us go in confidence in God's promise and power, With God, mountains can move. And so may God of life, God of justice, God of peace, grant us all with the values of moving towards a better world together. May God open our eyes that we see the image of God in each other. And every one of us, as we strive together for life in abundance, which is the mystery of God's creation, of the will of God. An Anglican priest, Harry Wiggett, was serving Eucharist in the prison. As can be expected, the warder, the guard, was standing aloof, watching that these prisoners don't run away whilst they're having communion. And so after the sharing of peace, Mandela walked to the warder, who was keeping a watchful eye, and said, "This is Holy Communion, and we must share and receive it together." A prisoner inviting his keeper that come and have a foretaste of the heavenly banquet, because we must share it together. This is a beautiful world that God has created in the wish of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Let us share it together. Amen.
All right, live visuals from the Orlando East Methodist Church as they observe a special prayer service in honor of Madiba's family, this was the church that he worshipped at in Soweto. The Reverend there was speaking about wilderness stories in likeness to Madiba's life and how Madiba actually resembled Moses, who soldiered on against all adversity. He even took a swipe on those who have said that Nelson Mandela was a sellout. He said leaders who get elected by popular votes will lead us nowhere, but in Mandela, his values were a moral compass for future leaders who will liberate this country. The widow of the late statesman Gracia Machel is also in attendance. Let's take a quick ad break now. More news on top of the hour.